Was Catherine the Great truly the nymphomaniac monster that history painted her to be? Or was she a brilliant woman whose intimate relationships were weaponized against her by enemies who couldn't bear to see a female ruler succeed? What if I told you that the most scandalous stories about Russia's greatest empress were deliberate fabrications designed to destroy her legacy, while the real truth about her love life was far more complex, political, and ultimately tragic than anyone dared imagine? For over 2 centuries, the world has whispered salacious tales about Catherine II of Russia. They speak of countless lovers, of depraved sexual appetites, of a woman who supposedly died in the most humiliating circumstances possible. These stories have become so entrenched in popular culture that they've overshadowed one of history's most remarkable rulers. But what if everything you think you know about Catherine's love life is a lie? Tonight, we're going to peel back the layers of propaganda, political manipulation, and outright fiction to reveal the shocking truth about Catherine the Great's intimate relationships. We'll discover how her enemies turned her greatest vulnerability into a weapon against her, how European courts conspired to destroy her reputation, and why the real story of her heart is more fascinating than any myth ever created. The revelations we're about to uncover will change everything you thought you knew about power, love, and the price ambitious women pay for greatness. Some of these truths have been buried for centuries, hidden in encrypted letters and classified diplomatic documents. Others have been staring us in the face all along, obscured only by our willingness to believe the worst about a woman who dared to rule an empire. Before we dive into this journey through the hidden chambers of Russian imperial history, make sure to subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell. And I want to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever questioned the stories you've heard about powerful historical women? What other female rulers do you think have been unfairly maligned by history? To understand the truth about Catherine's romantic life, we must first understand the woman herself and the impossible position she occupied. Born Princess Sophie of Anhalt-Zerbst-Dornburg in 1729, she arrived in Russia as a teenage bride to the future Peter III, a man who would prove to be both politically incompetent and personally repugnant. Catherine's early years in Russia were marked by isolation, political intrigue, and a loveless marriage. Her husband Peter was more interested in playing with toy soldiers than governing an empire, and he made no secret of his preference for his mistress over his wife. The young German princess found herself trapped in a foreign court, speaking a language she was still learning, surrounded by people who viewed her with suspicion and barely concealed contempt. The Russian court of the 18th century was a labyrinth of competing factions, each vying for influence over the throne. Marriages among the nobility were political arrangements, and extramarital relationships were not only accepted but expected, provided they served strategic purposes. Love was a luxury few could afford, especially those in positions of power. Catherine quickly learned these rules. She understood that survival in the Russian court required allies, and allies often came through carefully cultivated personal relationships. What appeared to outsiders as romantic liaisons were frequently political partnerships disguised as affairs of the heart. This was the game everyone played, but because Catherine was a woman and a foreigner, her participation would later be twisted into evidence of moral corruption. The Russian Orthodox Church played a crucial role in legitimizing royal authority, but it also provided Catherine's enemies with ammunition. Every relationship she formed could be framed as adultery, every political alliance recast as sexual impropriety. The Church's teachings about female virtue created a double bind for any woman who dared to wield real power. During her early years as empress, Catherine maintained the fiction that her relationships were purely personal matters. She appointed lovers to positions of influence, yes, but this was standard practice for male rulers throughout Europe. Louis XIV of France had done the same with his mistresses, as had countless other kings. Yet what was considered shrewd politics when practiced by men would be labeled moral depravity when practiced by Catherine. But this comfortable illusion of understanding Catherine's motivations is about to shatter completely, because the reality of her intimate relationships was far more complex, strategic, and ultimately heartbreaking than the simplified narrative of a lusty empress collecting lovers like trophies. The first shocking truth about Catherine's love life is that many of her so-called lovers never shared her bed at all. The list of Catherine's supposed paramours, endlessly repeated by historians and gossip mongers, includes men who were political allies, distant correspondents, or complete fabrications created by her enemies. The myth of Catherine's insatiable appetite served multiple purposes for those seeking to undermine her authority. Take the case of Stanisław Poniatowski, whom history records as one of Catherine's great loves. The truth is far more nuanced and politically motivated. Poniatowski was indeed Catherine's lover, but their relationship began when she was still Grand Duchess, trapped in a miserable marriage and desperately seeking allies who could help her survive court intrigue. When Catherine later engineered Poniatowski's election as King of Poland, European diplomats couldn't accept that a woman might be capable of such sophisticated political maneuvering. Instead, they spread rumors that she had elevated a former lover to a throne out of romantic sentiment. The reality was that Catherine had chosen Poniatowski precisely because their former intimacy gave her leverage over him. She needed a compliant ruler in Poland to serve Russian interests, and what better way to ensure compliance than to place someone on the throne who owed his position entirely to her favor? This wasn't romance, it was ruthless geopolitics disguised as affection. Even more disturbing is how Catherine's political enemies deliberately conflated her advisory council with her bedroom. Men like Nikita Panin, who served as her foreign minister, were whispered about as lovers simply because they enjoyed her confidence and trust. The implication was clear. How else could a mere woman evaluate a man's political capabilities except through sexual intimacy? The propaganda campaign against Catherine reached its most vicious extreme in the stories spread about her death. The persistent myth that she died while attempting to have intercourse with a horse was not accidental gossip, but deliberate character assassination, probably originating from French diplomatic circles who were furious about Russia's growing influence in European affairs. This obscene lie has persisted for over 2 centuries, demonstrating how successfully Catherine's enemies weaponized misogyny against her. French diplomats and journalists, in particular, found Catherine's success deeply threatening. Here was a German-born woman who had transformed Russia from a backward European periphery into a major power capable of challenging French hegemony. Unable to defeat her armies or outmaneuver her diplomatically, they attacked her femininity instead, spreading increasingly outrageous stories about her private life. The sexual mythology surrounding Catherine served another crucial purpose. It allowed European courts to dismiss her genuine political achievements as the products of masculine influence rather than feminine capability. If Catherine was merely a puppet controlled by her lovers, then her military victories, territorial expansions, and domestic reforms could be credited to the men around her rather than to her own strategic brilliance. What makes this character assassination even more tragic is that Catherine was acutely aware of how her gender was being used against her. Her private letters reveal a woman constantly struggling to balance her need for political allies and personal companionship with the knowledge that any relationship would be weaponized by her enemies. She lived in a gilded cage where every human connection became a potential liability. But perhaps the most shocking revelation is how few genuine love affairs Catherine actually experienced. Beneath the propaganda and political maneuvering, there emerges the portrait of a deeply lonely woman who found true emotional connection with only a handful of men throughout her 34-year reign. The real story of Catherine's heart begins with Grigory Orlov, the man who would become not just her lover, but the father of her only acknowledged illegitimate child. Orlov was everything Catherine's husband Peter was not: brave, charismatic, politically astute, and completely devoted to her success. Their relationship began in 1760, when Catherine was still planning the coup that would eventually place her on the throne. Orlov wasn't just Catherine's lover, he was her revolutionary partner. The Orlov brothers commanded significant influence among the Guards regiments that would prove crucial to Catherine's seizure of power. Without Grigory Orlov's military connections and unwavering support, Catherine might never have successfully deposed her husband and claimed the throne for herself. What made their relationship truly remarkable was its genuine emotional depth. Catherine's letters to Orlov reveal a woman capable of profound vulnerability and authentic affection. She wrote to him not as an empress addressing a subject, but as a woman speaking to the man she loved. These weren't political communications disguised as love letters, they were the real thing. Their son, Alexei Bobrinsky, was born in 1762, just months before Catherine's coup. The timing was incredibly dangerous, having an illegitimate child while plotting to overthrow one's husband could have provided enemies with the perfect justification for preventing her access to power. Yet Catherine chose to carry the pregnancy to term, suggesting that her feelings for Orlov went far deeper than political convenience. For 12 years, Orlov remained Catherine's closest companion. He was elevated to count, showered with honors and estates, and treated as her unofficial consort. European courts recognized him as the power behind the throne, and diplomatic correspondence from the period makes clear that foreign ambassadors understood they needed Orlov's support to gain Catherine's favor. But even this genuine love story was ultimately corrupted by the demands of power. As Russia's international position strengthened, Catherine needed different qualities in her inner circle. Orlov's military background and straightforward personality, perfect for the dangerous early years of her reign, became less valuable as she turned her attention to complex diplomatic negotiations and administrative reforms. The end of their relationship was heartbreaking for both parties. Catherine couldn't simply dismiss Orlov without appearing fickle and potentially creating a dangerous enemy. Orlov couldn't gracefully accept diminished influence without seeming to abandon the woman who had made him one of the most powerful men in Russia. Their love became a casualty of imperial politics. The most tragic aspect of Catherine's romantic life, however, was her relationship with Grigory Potemkin, a connection so intense and complex that historians still struggle to understand its true nature. Potemkin entered Catherine's life in 1774 during one of the most challenging periods of her reign, when she was facing both internal rebellion and external military threats. Unlike her other relationships, Catherine's bond with Potemkin transcended the usual categories of lover, advisor, or political ally. Potemkin was simultaneously her intimate partner, her chief minister, her military commander, and quite possibly her secret husband. Recent historical research has uncovered evidence suggesting that Catherine and Potemkin may have been secretly married in 1774, making their relationship not an illicit affair, but a legitimate union hidden from public view for political reasons. The intensity of their connection is evident in their correspondence. Catherine and Potemkin wrote to each other constantly, sometimes multiple times per day, sharing not just political information, but intimate thoughts, fears, and dreams. These letters reveal a relationship of intellectual equals, two brilliant minds working in perfect partnership to reshape an empire. Potemkin understood Catherine in ways that no one else ever had. He recognized her genius while accepting her vulnerabilities, supported her ambitions while challenging her assumptions, and loved her completely while never trying to diminish her power. In return, Catherine trusted Potemkin with responsibilities that went far beyond what any previous favorite had enjoyed. Together, they planned the conquest of the Crimea, the expansion into the Black Sea, and the creation of new provinces that would extend Russian influence deep into what is now Ukraine and southern Russia. These weren't just military campaigns, they were grand strategic visions that required years of careful preparation and flawless execution. The fact that Catherine entrusted such monumental projects to Potemkin speaks to the extraordinary nature of their partnership. But their relationship also contained the seeds of its own destruction. Potemkin's jealousy, Catherine's political necessities, and the impossible pressures of managing an empire while conducting an intimate relationship created constant tension. Their love letters are interspersed with bitter arguments, passionate reconciliations, and the ongoing struggle to balance personal desires with imperial responsibilities. The true nature of Catherine's later relationships has been obscured by the same propaganda machinery that distorted her earlier ones. Men like Ivan Rimsky-Korsakov, Alexander Lanskoy, and Platon Zubov have been dismissed by historians as mere playthings, young men chosen for their physical beauty and sexual prowess rather than their political capabilities. This interpretation reveals more about historical prejudices than about Catherine's actual motivations. By the 1780s, Catherine was an experienced ruler who had survived multiple wars, rebellions, and diplomatic crises. The idea that she would jeopardize her carefully maintained authority for the sake of sexual gratification defies everything we know about her character and political acumen. The reality is that Catherine's later favorites served crucial functions in her administration. Lanskoy, far from being a mere boy toy, was being groomed for significant political responsibilities before his premature death devastated Catherine emotionally. Zubov, despite his youth, proved to be an effective administrator and military commander who played important roles in Russia's continued expansion. What appears to have happened is that Catherine developed a preference for younger partners not out of vanity or lust, but because she needed collaborators who weren't already corrupted by court politics or compromised by existing loyalties. Older courtiers came with baggage alliances, debts, family obligations that could conflict with their service to the Empress. Younger men could be shaped according to Catherine's vision and trusted with sensitive responsibilities. Even her selection process reveals careful political calculation rather than impulsive romantic choice. Potential favorites were extensively investigated, their backgrounds examined, their loyalties tested before they ever gained access to Catherine's inner circle. This was recruitment, not seduction. But the most devastating truth about Catherine's love life is how it ultimately isolated her from genuine human connection. By the end of her reign, she had learned that every relationship would be scrutinized, criticized, and weaponized against her. The price of maintaining power was accepting that she could never again experience the uncomplicated affection she had once shared with Orlov or the intellectual partnership she had found with Potemkin. Catherine's final years were marked by increasing loneliness, despite being surrounded by courtiers and advisors. She had become the prisoner of her own legend, trapped in a role that demanded perfection while denying her the basic human need for intimacy and emotional support. The woman who had once written passionate love letters to Orlov and Potemkin now composed only official correspondence and diplomatic dispatches. The ultimate irony of Catherine's story is that her enemies' attacks on her sexuality were both completely wrong and devastatingly effective. Wrong because Catherine was far more emotionally complex and politically sophisticated than her detractors imagined. Effective because they created a narrative that has persisted for centuries, overshadowing her genuine achievements and reducing one of history's greatest rulers to a collection of salacious anecdotes. The real tragedy isn't that Catherine had lovers, it's that she was never allowed to have them on her own terms. Every relationship was filtered through the expectations and prejudices of a world that couldn't accept female authority. Every intimate moment transformed into evidence of moral corruption or political weakness. In her private moments, Catherine must have understood that history would judge her harshly, not for what she had done, but for who she was. The same relationships that would have enhanced a male ruler's reputation served only to undermine hers. The same political acumen that would have been praised in a king was dismissed as manipulation in a queen. Today, more than 2 centuries after Catherine's death, we're still grappling with the myths her enemies created. The stories of her sexual excess have proven more durable than the records of her legislative reforms, her military victories, or her cultural achievements. This persistence reveals how successfully misogyny can be disguised as historical fact, how effectively propaganda can masquerade as scholarship. What we've discovered tonight should fundamentally change how we view not just Catherine the Great, but powerful women throughout history. How many other female rulers have had their legacies distorted by similar campaigns of sexual character assassination? How many brilliant political minds have been reduced to gossip and speculation about their private lives? Catherine's story is ultimately a warning about the price of ambition for women in positions of power. She achieved everything a ruler could hope for: territorial expansion, domestic prosperity, cultural advancement, international respect, but she paid for it with her reputation, her privacy, and ultimately her emotional well-being. The archives still hold secrets about Catherine's personal relationships, encrypted letters that haven't been decoded, diplomatic dispatches that remain classified, private papers that were deliberately destroyed to protect reputations. Perhaps future historians will uncover evidence that further challenges our assumptions about her intimate life. But even with the knowledge we have now, we can see Catherine's story for what it truly was. Not the tale of a sexually voracious empress, but the tragedy of a brilliant woman who was punished for daring to rule in a man's world. Her lovers weren't her weakness, they were her strength, her allies, her partners in the monumental task of governing an empire. The next time you hear someone repeat the old stories about Catherine the Great's sexual appetites, remember what we've learned tonight. Remember that behind every myth about a powerful woman's sexuality lies a more complex truth about politics, propaganda, and the price of challenging patriarchal expectations. Subscribe to our channel if you want to explore more hidden truths about history's most fascinating figures, and leave a comment below telling us which historical myths you'd like us to investigate next. The real stories are always more interesting than the legends, and sometimes they're more shocking than anyone dared imagine.